Okay, good morning and welcome back, everyone. And this morning we are going to be using the paints that I have in front of me. These are what most guests use here in the artist loft. To my right, I have a selection of acrylic paints, and to my left, a selection of our dry watercolor paints. Now, these usually come with two levels to them. You'll see there's another one underneath there. They're dry, and obviously you need to use water to add to those to free up the pigment. But also with acrylic, it's water-based until dry. So I've got some nice clean pots of water here, which is important, of course, because you've got to remember to go up to the sink and always refresh your water, because as it gets more muddy, it's going to contaminate your future colors. So you want true colors, so best to keep your water changed often. Then I have a selection of brushes, just to explain a little bit more about their use, because a lot of people do see these brushes in an art shop and not everyone knows what they can do, what they're for. So I have the typical ones here. That's what we're all used to typically from school. It's called a round brush, and that's because when seen from above, it is round in shape and then tapers to a point. And this is a size 8 round brush. They're all numbered in size. And then this is a round brush also, but a size 2. So a smaller version of that. Then we have the flat or wash brush. It's excellent for covering large areas very quickly, background, skies, and so on. And then finally we have this, not false eyelashes on a stick, otherwise known as a fan brush. Okay, and this is great for doing things like trees, fir trees, conifers, foliage, and so on. And then I have a ruler. Well, no surprises what that's for, drawing a straight line, but I'm going to show you how to paint a straight line with a ruler the right way. So one thing to discuss first is care of your materials. If you're going to set up yourself with art materials when you get home, you are going to spend a lot of money. And what I want to show you is things like you don't need to buy every single size brush in the art shop. You can buy about 3 sizes in between. So I would recommend a size 1 brush, a size 4 brush, a size 8, and a size 12 will be sufficient, because we're going to also be discussing brush pressure today. So you can make much wider strokes, because when you push down on your brush, the bristles open up and you can get much larger strokes. I am using a piece of watercolor paper here today, and I can paint with watercolor and acrylic on. You could use mixed media. The only thing with acrylics is they dry very quickly. If you're used to painting with oil, you'll know that oil lasts for a few days. You can still blend it and move it around, but acrylic, it dries the same day, if not within a few hours even. So you have to be fast with acrylics, and that's why I don't recommend on the whole painting palette knife as I do with acrylics, because you may paint some acrylic down and have a lot of texture and then it dries rock hard. Then you come with fresh acrylic paint to try and put it on top, and it catches on all those peaks and ridges. So we have something here called retarder gel, and that's a chemical you mix with your acrylic paints to slow their drying time down. So you mix it, it's clear gel, and you mix it about 30% to 70% of your paint color, and it just stops it drying so fast. It means those who like to blend more time and feather, you may do so. So first of all, I want to just show you how to paint a straight line with a ruler. So to my right, I've got a little bit of Indian ink on my palette, and I'm just going to pick that up now with my size 2 brush. So you don't want to spoil your ruler, as somebody has done here. You can see there's a lot of dirt here and there on the ruler, and that's because somebody thought they could paint a straight line by putting the ruler flat on the surface and painting up against the leading edge. Well, two things bad are going to happen. You're going to destroy the measuring area part of your ruler. You're not going to be able to see it anymore. And secondly, because when you have this ruler flat on your paper and you introduce liquid or something wet, and then you lift that away, it's going to drag because that liquid gets sucked underneath. So here's a little trick you may not have heard of before, is you pick your ruler up with all your fingers behind the ruler and then only your thumb in front. So I'm left-handed. You would reverse this if you were right-handed. You'd put your fingers behind and thumb in front. Then you lay it down on your paper, but it won't lay flat because your fingers are lifting that ruler up. Then you put the metal part of your barrel against the ruler, and then you just slide your paintbrush along, and that's how you get a dirt-free straight line. So a neat little trick there. Also, cleaning your brushes. This is not rocket science, but it has to be done right. And very often I see people just tinkle their brush in the top of the pot, and you saw the black ink come out, thinking that brush is clean. It certainly isn't, and I'll demonstrate that now by using this paper towel and wiping my brush. Look how much black paint is still in that brush. So the way to clean a brush correctly is descend it to the very bottom of the pot, push down and stir around. So what I've done is by pushing down on the bottom, it's opened all the bristles up and it allows the pigment in those bristles to flow out freely. And then just wipe off the excess. And then if you wipe that brush, there's no black there. So that's the way to clean it. Now that water's already getting dirty, and at the end of the day, when you finish painting, you should then take your brushes that have been rinsed or cleaned in here to the sink and run it under pure clean water to get them thoroughly clean. Brushes can be incredibly expensive. You can pay $40 for one brush. You know, if it's made of fine Kolinsky sable hair, very expensive. So look after your brushes. Another thing you never do, as romantic as it looks in an artist studio, is leave a brush standing on its bristles in a pot of water, or even without water. What happens? Well, that lovely point and that delicate bristles there, expensive bristles in some cases, the weight of the handle is pushing down on it in the water and it's bending the brush. And it's very hard to ever get that straight again to a point. Another thing, water and wood don't like to be together for a long time. They swell up. So what's happening now is water is already going up the bristle and it's touching the wooden handle that's attached to the metal barrel. And then the wood is absorbing the water. And if you've ever been painting with a brush and lots of flakes of varnish on the handle or the paint on the handle is peeling off and crumbling in your painting, that's because somebody left the brush standing in a pot of water like that. And eventually disaster will strike where it's been left in water so long and things become detached and that whole metal barrel with the brush can drop off and in your artwork if you're not careful. So if you're going to leave brushes in a pot, leave them upright with no water in them. Never leave them just sitting in the pot. Okay, so now let's just cover a little area of watercolor paper, and I'm just wondering, Shuna, if I may ask for a little bit of the paper towel there that's by the sink, not this one, the tissues. I'm going to need that for a little demonstration. So this is the flat and wash brush. Here it is. Thank you very much. I'm going to need that in a moment. Here's the flat wash brush. So this is watercolor paper. It's lovely and thick. That's the important thing, so it doesn't bend. And I'm just wetting a patch because I want to do a little sunset sky in sort of gradient going from warm yellowy orange up to deeper red. So there I have a wet area, a bit hard to see on the camera, but if I just tilt that, you can see that patch of wet area there. These watercolors, I need to add water to them to free up some pigment. So I'm just going to literally massage that water in, and as I do that, the colour is being sucked up my brush. And had I not wet the area and you paint with watercolour, you get sharp edges to your strokes. But when you introduce that colour to something you've wet, it starts to bleed out. This is a very cool effect if you're doing especially things like orchids, petals, and you wet each petal at a time with water gently, and then you just introduce some pigment on the edge of the petal. It will run into the center. So you can achieve some very interesting effects with that. But I want to do a sunset sky, so I'm just going to go over where we initially put the water. I'm just going to go gently up, and then I'm going to take my slightly darker paint here, red. And again, if I touch that, it's bleeding. And that's the ideal time when you're looking for a gradient from one color to another, to do it while it's wet. So there we have my red, and you can see it already wanting to join the yellow. And you just do gentle strokes just over there like that, and that should do us. So I'm just going to rinse that brush out now and try and blend that a little better so we get rid of that join. So we're just going to go back over here with our yellow, gently passing. You can see what's happening now. It's just fading nicely up there. So if you've ever done watercolors, a purist watercolorist will know that you don't paint the paper with anything if you want that left white at the end in your picture. You can do mixed media and cheat and take white acrylic at the end on top. But if you're doing a sky, let's say it's a big piece of paper and you've got puffy white clouds in your sky, it's an absolute nightmare to paint very quickly all the blue around those puffy clouds without getting joins in your blue or like overlap strokes. So while that's still wet, here's a little neat trick that none of you may know, is you take a soft tissue and you soak up what you've just put down. And this is how you can get instant, nice fluffy clouds without having to paint all around them. I hear somebody saying, wow, you like that, yeah? Isn't that cool? So I'm going to let that dry now because I can't go ahead and paint a palm tree on top of that. I can't add detail to it because it's still wet. It's going to bleed. So the way to tell if a watercolor is dry is you can use a hairdryer to speed it up, but don't put it too close because depending how wet you've got your paper, it can spread out the paint. The other is to let it dry in the air naturally, and that's what I'm going to do while I move on to the acrylic. The way to tell if it's dry is to put the side of the palm there of your hand away from your painting and feel the temperature here. It's very sensitive, this part of your hand. Feel that temperature. If you put it on there and it feels colder, it's still wet. So we're going to let that do its thing now. Okay, brush pressure. Here is our size 2 brush, and here's our Indian ink again. And I always like to work down my background first and work my way down in my painting so I can rest my hand on the paper. It steadies your hand, especially when you are on a cruise ship. I mean, today we have a sea day, so it's very smooth, very calm. We're very fortunate. But sometimes when it's rough and your hand is hovering over the painting, you've got to wait for the right wave to put your stroke down. So it's good to rest your hand like so and get that more controlled. But also I have this spare hand, so you take your finger and thumb and you lock that hand with the other. And then all you're bothered about is the action tip of that brush, and you can get really fine lines. Now, when you press down on the brush, it opens up and it starts to get thicker, like that. And I can get that even thicker still. But the reason I said you don't need to buy every single brush in the range is because here I'm going to take a size 8 brush and do exactly what I just did with a size 2 with the much larger brush. I need to wet it first. There we go. And then pick up some of that ink. make sure you get a point. Now what I'm doing is I'm laying it on its side and I'm twirling the brush to get a really fine point. And then using the same system, you can do very fine lines, just using the tip of that brush, exactly the same as those. And then press down and you get the same thickness lines. But of course, because it's so much wider, you can get a lovely stroke as wide as the brush as well. So brush pressure, very important to learn. And we used to use this at Disney all the time, the black ink and a size 1 or a size 2 brush for outlining all the Disney characters. They were never done with a black pen because a pen is a uniform line and Disney wanted character even in the outline. And in fact, you can see I have a little lump on my finger here, and that's from where I've been gripping this brush for many years, outlining or inking all the characters. Okay, so let's play with colour. So, to my right, the acrylics. Now, the paint companies sell probably about 50 different types of colour in the tubes. And, you know, if you're starting out, the temptation is to just find the right colour in that tube and paint with it straight away. But although there are 50 colours and you can kind of get away with most of them, if you know how to mix a little bit of one colour or two colours to another, you can extend your palette, your available colours, by literally millions. So we're going to play with just a few of those today, but we could do a whole month on mixing colour, and that's something you've got to learn and just find your way by experimenting with colours. So acrylics like a wet brush, and this is tear-off palette paper that you'll be using to put your paint selection on. I would recommend you don't put the entire spread colour of the rainbow on your palette because you're not going to get around to using a lot of those colours in day one. So only take the colours you need that you're going to be painting with at the time. These are already starting to dry and forming a skin on top of them, and they've only been sat here 10 minutes. So please don't waste the paint. We have plenty of it, but I'd rather you come up and help yourself to more paint when you need it than throw big lumps of it out each day. So wet the brush, and then we can add some water here to our palette. So this is waterproof. This is where we do all our mixing before we go paint with it. So let's play with a few colours. I often get asked, what's a great flesh colour? How do you make flesh colour? Well, the world is full of fabulous, all different tints, tones and shades of flesh colour. But let's just take, because I have the colour out here, portrait pink, I'll do a white Caucasian. So this is called light portrait pink. And if I was to paint a portrait with it, it's very strong. And I always say, unless you're a British naked in the Sahara Desert without sunscreen, nobody's flesh colour should look that pink. You need to see a doctor. So what can we do with that to make it so much more pleasing and user-friendly? Well, there are two things we can do. We can take our light portrait pink, we can take a little bit of titanium white to lighten it, there. And the other colour as artists use a lot after white is yellow ochre. And that will just tone that brightness down and make it more sort of skin tone. And there it is. What a difference. So just by adding a little bit of white, a bit of yellow ochre, that's made a huge difference to that. So let's just do a few more. Now, if you think back to your school days, and if I ask you what two colours make purple, you're all going to sit there and shout out red and blue, right? Yeah, you all agree. I'm not going to do it because it's wrong. So I'm not going to I've done this many years, so I'm not going to do it. But what I'm going to do is skip to what you do need to make purple. So here we go. You do need blue and a red-ish. But here we go. Now I've got a row up top here of cool colours and a row of warm colours. If you've ever seen what's called the colour wheel, on the right side are all the cool colours, these, and on the left side are all the warm. So I need to take my blue, the cool colour, but it's ultramarine blue, and it's already a bit purpley, as opposed to the cerulean blue to the right that's a bit yellowy. So here's our ultramarine blue, and sit that in that white. There we have that. So I do not want red. That's red there. I want magenta to the left of it. And that's how you make the best purple you can get, not red and blue. There it is. You can see it clearly. And that's your purple there. And if you want, this camera is a little bit low resolution, so I can add a little bit more magenta just to make that more exaggerated, like so. So there's purple, magenta and ultramarine blue. You may have heard of cool and warm greys, or you can cool the colour down any colours and warm any colour up. But if we take a neutral grey, so where would you need a warm grey and where would you need a cool grey? Well, that's perhaps if you've got a landscape and it's got rock, stone, concrete, cement, what have you. Think of the picture. What part of the rock or stone is in the sunlight would be warm because the sun's on it. And then what part would be a cool grey? It would be the parts in shadow because there's no sunlight getting to it. So let's start with a neutral grey, and that is not rocket science, that's just white and black. That's how you make grey. So there's our white, and I'm going to take my bit of black here, just a little. And that's another thing, folks. Please don't go take a huge glob of black to add to that white to make grey, because it only needs the bit I have on the tip of my brush to make a big difference. So that's another thing to learn in colour mixing. Just because you know you need a certain other colour, don't go take a blob of it and put it in your mix, because you'll never get it out. Best to always go back, take a little bit more if you need it, than try and get that colour out. So here's our neutral grey. There it is. So to warm that grey up, we're going to use that favourite colour again, yellow ochre. And it's going to turn it into kind of a little mushroomy grey. You can see it there already coming along there. And if I pop that there, that becomes a warm grey. And you can see the difference there on my palette. If you want a cool grey, you're going to take from the cool spectrum. But don't take ultramarine, it's way too strong in value, and you have to know exactly how much to take of that because it's so strong. So take a lighter blue, just a little, and put that in that neutral grey. And there you have your cool grey. So just by having neutral grey with yellow ochre and blue, you've got two new colours. And there's the cool grey. Okay. Same thing with the green. Someone once said to me, well, I need my grass for my painting, and I really like this light yellow green, which is this one here. And the problem with this is it is so neon bright and fluorescent that nothing in nature in terms of grass ever looks so strong. And if I plant that about there, it's way too bright. You can't paint with it unless you're doing an abstract or something very pop art and you need these bright, strong colours. So what can you do to that green to make it more natural looking? Well, when you observe nature, there's a lot of yellow, there's a lot of orange, a lot of red in yellow. And if I take, in green, if I take yellow ochre again and just mix that in there, all of a sudden I have a far more earthy, sappy looking green that looks more natural, and I've killed the neon brightness of that green. I can also cool that down by taking blue again, just like we did with the grey. But we need to get on with our demonstration. So mixing colour is a wonderful thing to explore. You know, remember that acrylics dry very quickly, so no need to squeeze every colour out that you're not even going to get around to using. Just take the colours you need. So if you're doing sky, and I always recommend you do your background first, things that are furthest away, Typically in a landscape that will be sky, clouds, then hills, mountains, and then maybe, mid-ground, then foreground you may have a river, you may have trees right close to you. So think about planes of depth when you're painting also. Very hard to paint a blue sky with clouds around a tree in the foreground with 1,000 leaves on it. It's virtually impossible. So we're going to do a little bit of fun now and do a oak tree with leaves, branches, twigs, everything with a size 8 brush. And I'm not going to use a size 00 brush for my branches because I've showed you brush pressure, and that's all you need, brush control, knowing how far to push that brush into the painting, basically. So let's start down here. So I start very lightly with my twigs, and then I press down, coming towards my tree trunk for my branch. Again, another one here, press down, get thicker as I come towards my tree trunk. I'm not going to bother too much about detail here because I'm going to cover most of these with leaves. So just carrying on around. Now this tree is looking like it's been struck by lightning at the moment, but we're going to change all that in a second. Okay, so now I've got my branches there, and I can use the same brush for the trunk. So I'm going to flatten now and press down more towards the bottom, and there I have my tree trunk, same brush. And just while that's wet, I can cover blending. Acrylic, both colours ideally need to be wet to feather one colour into the other or blend them. And I'm just going to highlight that tree trunk now with a little lighter colour. I'm going to exaggerate it a bit, do it very light so you can see it clearly. So while that's still wet, my brush is wet with that colour, I'm just going to paint on the left side of my tree trunk. But then I'm going to start going my journey right over the trunk, and each time I'm lifting pressure off. So you're getting this blend going from left to right, and that's a good way to do that. Obviously, if you're using the retarder gel, that's going to slow that drying time down so you can use it more. Let's just add that in there. Now, leaves. Greens. This is called, unfortunate name, folks, but it's called hooker's green. And it is probably about one of the only ones next to sap green that you can use straight out of the tube and very nicely in a nature scene. It's good to put this dark green background down before you add any detail of lighter greens on top. It's a good base. So I'm going to now use the same brush, but I'm going to turn the brush on its side and just dab. And here we go, filling our tree leaves in. And as I push out with my bristles, as I push out, we're using hooker's green. As I push down and press out with my bristles, it gives this sort of leafy edge. And while that's still wet, I'm going to go in and highlight some of those too. So I'm just going to dry this brush, pick up some lighter green, and as I mentioned earlier, we'll, I'll get through the demonstration and then happy at the end to take any questions. So please just hold those thoughts and I'll be answering those at the end of the lecture. So here we go, because I got to move quickly while this is still wet. And I'm touching on top and I'm just feathering that in. So I'm highlighting the top part of my tree. You can even then use your finger. That's another thing. But be careful with that, because if you're using things like cadmium colors, they're poisonous. So you don't want to make a habit of that without gloves. And there we have our highlighted tree. And now we're going to get our fan brush out. Fan brush is excellent for doing grass and other types of trees. So let's take our fan brush here. Now the way to use this fan brush is it's great because for nature, when you wet it or add paint to it, it groups in random clumps, and nature is random. If you are doing a vase of flowers, let's say, you're always taught to paint odd numbers. Let's do 3 flowers or 5 flowers instead of 4 or 6, because for some reason odd numbers look more pleasing to the eye. So the fan brush is great for this, and we just need to take ourselves a little bit of dark green here. Just wet it a little bit more. You can see my water is filthy already and needs changing, but we'll just carry on with what we have. So I've wet my fan brush, and the way to get grass, short grass, is to put the brush like this, touch the paper, stroke up and lift off. And depending on how far you continue, the longer your grass will get. So you just touch the paper and start lifting up like this. And you have hundreds and hundreds, if I just hold that up, of blades of grass without using a size 00 brush, painting every single blade. And then you can go in and just highlight those with a little lighter, just on top, like so. Now, if you want longer grass, no need to go to the art shop and buy a fan brush that's that size, and they do exist. You can take the same size fan brush as I have here, and what you do is instead of having your brush that way on, you twirl it round, and then you can do longer blades of grass, like so. Okay, so you can fill a background very quickly, a cornfield or a field of tulips, very easily with that system. And then the other kind of tree that's great with a fan brush, and you might want to try one of these in the future, is like a pine or a fern, various types. So let's take our tree trunk first, and we're going to paint a trunk in here. So start small at the top and press down as I come towards the base. There we have it. Take our fan brush, load it with some dark green paint. Okay, that's good. So we're going to start at the top, upright. Just dab, just to get some stuff growing at the top. But then as you come down, we're going to start then turning our brush and having a little bit of fun. So you can see you can very quickly do a neat little forest full of those sort of trees. Okay, now, just to finish off, we're going to finish off on top of our watercolour area, which is now dry. And I'm going to need the lower level of colours for a dark green. Here it is. And I'm going to wet my brush, because these are dry blocks, remember, and just start freeing that pigment up. There we have it. And then we can confidently now, without the risk of any bleeding, just start to add a little bit of detail on that background. And then we'll just finish off with a tree trunk. So it's just process. It's a very different process, watercolor, because it's light to dark, whereas you've seen with acrylic and oil, I put dark to light. So it's kind of the opposite theory. And now I'm just going to take a very dark brown, and I'm being a bit naughty because I've gone from green straight to brown without washing my brush. But there's a way to resurrect that pure color back very simply, and I'll show you. First, I'll use it to paint our trunk. Again, pressure. Starting off light, then pressing down as I travel lower to get a thicker trunk at the base, like so. And then just to show you how you clean that. So you can wet that brown that I've added green to, and you just take a rag, a towel, and just press down, spin round a couple of times, and you've got the pure pigment color back again.